Welcome to our deep dive into the Oscars. We're going beyond the red carpets and the acceptance speeches to uncover the history and the craft behind the most prestigious award in the film industry.
It's amazing, isn't it, how this little golden statuette has become such a powerful symbol, carrying so much weight, so much history.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this. We all know it as the Oscar, but I bet most people don't know its official name.
Right, the official name is the Academy Award of Merit. And it's not just for actors either. It's presented to people across a bunch of different categories, covering the whole spectrum of movie making.
So we're talking Best Picture, Best Director, all the acting awards, but also, things like Best Sound Editing, Best Film Editing, and Costume Design. It covers a lot, huh?
Absolutely, and that actually ties into the design of the statuette itself. It's a knight standing on a film reel with 5 spokes. And those spokes, well, they represent the 5 original branches of the Academy: actors, writers, directors, producers, and technicians.
That's so cool. I always wondered what came first, the 5 branches or the 5 spokes? Like, was it intentional from the beginning?
It's a great question. I mean, it really speaks to the whole collaborative nature of film and how each of those branches is so crucial. As for the design, that was the brainchild of Cedric Gibbons. He was this legendary art director at MGM. He's the one who envisioned the knight standing on the reel, and the sculpting was done by George Stanley.
Oh, wow.
Fun fact, he also designed the Muse Fountain at the Hollywood Bowl.
Wow, so he had a big impact on Hollywood. I was surprised to learn the Oscar statuette isn't actually as light as it looks. Have you ever held one? They look heavy.
Yeah, they are heavier than you might think. The Oscar is 13.5 inches tall, weighs 8.5 pounds, and is made of gold-plated bronze on a black metal base.
Yeah, and it wasn't always gold-plated, right? I think the early Oscars were made of something else.
You're right. It started with solid bronze, but then they switched to Britannia metal because it was more affordable, kind of like pewter. And for the gold look, they played it with copper, then nickel silver, and finally 24-karat gold.
Did you know World War II even impacted the Oscars?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because metal was scarce during the war. For 3 years, from 43 to 45, the Oscars were made of painted plaster.
Really? Painted plaster?
Can you imagine winning an Oscar and getting a plaster statue?
That's crazy. I wonder what happened to all those plaster Oscars.
The winners could actually trade them in for metal ones after the war, so most of them are probably long gone. But wouldn't it be cool to see one today, like a real reminder of how even Hollywood was affected by the war?
Totally. So, for years, there was a whole process for making the Oscars, but I'm guessing things have changed with, all the new technology. Where are they made now, and what's the process like?
Yeah, you're right. The process has definitely evolved. From 1983 to 2015, they were made by R.S. Owens and Company in Chicago. They were making about 50 every year, and each one took like 3 to 4 weeks to make.
Wow, that's a lot of Oscars. But they're not made in Chicago anymore, right?
Nope. In 2016, the Academy went back to using bronze and switched manufacturers. Now they're made at Polish Talix Fine Art Foundry in New York. They use this cool process that combines traditional techniques with new technology.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So they start by digitally scanning an original 1929 Oscar to create a 3D model. And then they use that model to make ceramic molds with a 3D printer. Finally, they pour liquid bronze into those molds to get all those intricate details.
That's pretty incredible. I never knew that much detail went into them.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic, though. You have this knight standing on a film reel with the name Oscar. That's nowhere on it. How did that nickname even come about?
That's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows for sure. I mean, there are a ton of theories, but no one's sure which is the right one.
Let's hear some of them. What are the top theories?
Okay, well, one involves Margaret Herrick, who was the Academy librarian. She later became the president. She said she named it after her uncle Oscar, but there's really no proof of that.
That doesn't sound too likely. What else?
Well, then there's Bette Davis. She claimed that the statue's backside reminded her of her first husband, Harmon Oscar Nelson. It's kind of a funny image, but she later said she made it up, so who knows?
So, the mystery continues. Any other good ones?
A few. One theory gives credit to a columnist, Sidney Skolsky. He used the name Oscar in an article in 1934. But there is evidence that people were already calling it that. It seems like he was just one of the first to use it in print.
Interesting. Who else do we have?
There's another theory from Bruce Davis. He was an Academy executive. He believes that Eleanor Lilleberg might be behind the name. She was an Academy secretary back then. And apparently, her brother mentioned in his autobiography that she had a family friend named Oscar who always stood straight and tall, just like the statue.
That's a pretty good theory. Maybe there's some truth to that one.
Right. It's definitely one of the more believable ones. And just to add to the mystery, someone recently found a newspaper article from 1933 that uses the name Oscar. It's even earlier than all the other theories we just talked about.
No way. So the mystery goes on and on. What are the chances they'll ever actually solve this?
I don't know. It would be amazing if they did, though, wouldn't it? It's a real piece of Hollywood history that's still a mystery.
Speaking of history, is it true the statues they hand out at the ceremony are blank?
Yep. The winners' names get engraved afterward. They used to have to wait a while, but now they have a special engraving station at the governor's ball so they can get it done right after the ceremony.
That makes sense. I bet they want to show off their personalized Oscars as soon as possible. That makes me wonder, do winners actually own their Oscars?
That's where it gets interesting. Before 1950, yeah, they did. That's why Oscars from before that year sell for so much at auction. But since 1950, there's a rule that winners have to offer to sell the Oscar back to the Academy for $1.
Wait, $1? Why would anyone do that? If I won, I wouldn't sell it for $1, that's for sure.
It's not about the money, it's about the idea, you know? The Academy wants to preserve the history and value of the award. They see it as something beyond just money.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I bet there are people who have tried to sell their Oscars for a lot more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There have been legal battles and sales over the years. Like, Michael Todd's grandson tried to sell the Best Picture Oscar that Todd won for Around the World in 80 Days. But the Academy took him to court and stopped it.
Wow, they're serious about that dollar rule.
Yeah.
Seems like they're really committed to protecting the Oscars legacy.
Definitely. There have been exceptions, though. Harold Russell, who won Best Supporting Actor in '46, he sold his to pay for his wife's medical bills. You can't really argue with that.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. I wouldn't want to be in that situation.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many Oscars are out there in private collections that nobody even knows about.
Right. Like hidden pieces of Hollywood history tucked away somewhere. The good news is that some people end up returning them to the Academy so they can be preserved and displayed in the Academy's museum.
That's really cool. Okay, so we've talked about the statue itself. Let's shift gears and talk about the ceremony. It's safe to say the Academy Awards are a pretty big deal, right?
It's like the Super Bowl of movies. And it's the oldest entertainment awards ceremony in the world, started all the way back in 1929.
Wow, almost a century of Oscars. The first ceremony must have been totally different from what we see today.
Oh, absolutely. It was a private dinner at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. Only about 270 people there. Tickets were just $5. And the whole thing only lasted 15 minutes.
Seriously? That's crazy. Now it's this huge televised event that goes on for hours. When did it start being broadcast to everyone?
Well, they did the first radio broadcast in 1930, and then in '53, they showed it on television for the first time. Now it's global. Billions of viewers in over 76 countries.
The red carpet, the fashion, the speeches, it's all so iconic. Are there any other fun facts about the ceremony itself?
Well, for years it was held in March of April, but they moved it to February to, avoid competing with sports and holidays. Got to get those viewers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure those speeches can go on for a while. They must have had to make some rules over the years.
Oh, they have. Now there are time limits to keep the show moving. In 2018, Jimmy Kimmel, the host, even offered a jet ski as a prize for the shortest speech.
That's hilarious. It seems like the Academy's always trying to balance tradition with, keeping things entertaining. But I guess at its core, it's about celebrating the best in film.
Exactly. It's a celebration of movies, and the power of stories.
And for everyone watching at home, it's a chance to get swept up in the excitement of it all. I bet most people don't realize the Academy Awards aren't just about the statuettes. There are actually a bunch of other awards, each with their own history and significance.
That's true. Like the Governor's Awards, which are honorary awards, they're not given out every year. It might be a statuette or some other form of recognition.
Oh, okay. So kind of like Lifetime Achievement Awards.
Exactly. And then you've got the Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award, which is an Oscar statuette they give to someone in the industry who's done incredible humanitarian work.
So it's not just about making good movies, but making a difference in the world. I love that. Are there any other awards that people might not know about?
Yes. They have something called the Academy Scientific and Technical Awards for all those wizards behind the scenes who make the movie magic happen.
Oh, so these are the people developing the new technology and making it all possible.
Right. There are actually 3 levels. The Academy Award of Merit, which is an actual Oscar, the Scientific and Engineering Award, which is a bronze tablet, and the Technical Achievement Award, which is a certificate.
It's great that they get recognized, But the Academy Awards aren't just about, giving out awards, are they? Don't they help support new talent and the art of filmmaking in other ways?
Oh, absolutely. They have the John A. Bonner Medal of Commendation, which is a medal given to someone who's gone above and beyond in upholding the standards of the Academy.
That's really cool. Are there any awards specifically for filmmakers who are just starting out?
Definitely. There's the Gordon E. Sawyer Award, which goes to someone who's made big technological contributions. And there's also the Student Academy Awards, which are like the Oscars for student filmmakers.
Wow, talk about an incredible opportunity. It's great that the Academy supports the next generation of filmmakers like that, but they don't stop there, do they? I read they have fellowships for screenwriters, too.
They do. They have these nickel fellowships in screenwriting. It gives resources and mentorship to help up-and-coming writers really develop their skill. Yeah.
It's inspiring to see the Academy investing in the future of film. It's more than just awards. It's about growing talent and pushing the boundaries of storytelling.
Exactly. It really is an incredible organization with a rich history. But, it's important to remember that no institution is perfect. The Academy Awards has definitely had its share of criticism and controversy over the years.
That's true. You can't talk about the Oscars without addressing the drama. Where should we even begin?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms you hear is that the Oscars are too influenced by marketing and lobbying instead of, just artistic merit. Some people argue that studios spend millions on campaigns to try and win votes, and that takes away from focusing on the films themselves.
Yeah, I can see that. Marketing is so powerful. I wonder if it really has that much influence. Do those campaigns actually work?
It's hard to say for sure. But William Friedkin, he's the director who won for The French Connection, once called it the greatest promotion scheme that any industry ever devised for itself. So it's definitely a concern people have had for a while.
That's quite a statement. And, with all the talk about commercialism, another common criticism is that the Academy tends to favor certain types of films. They're always accused of loving historical epics, biographical dramas, and feel-good romantic comedies, especially the ones released right before award season.
Yeah, you always hear people calling those films Oscar bait. Yeah. They're designed to appeal to what the Academy wants to see, even if they're not really, the most popular with audiences.
So what are your thoughts on this Oscar bait thing? Is there any truth to it?
It's a big debate. I think it's unavoidable that there will always be films that seem made for award season, but that doesn't automatically mean they're bad films. It's more about recognizing that different films appeal to different people, and the Academy might not always agree with what the average moviegoer likes.
Right, and that difference in taste leads to those situations where a film wins a bunch of Oscars but then bombs at the box office. It happens a lot.
It does. And then you have films everyone loves that the Academy just ignores. Like The Dark Knight, that was a huge success, but it didn't even get nominated for Best Picture back in 2009. The reaction was so bad that some people think it's the reason they expanded the Best Picture category to 10 nominees the next year.
That's a pretty big change. Do you think The Dark Knight really caused that? Seems like a coincidence.
Maybe. The Academy hasn't ever confirmed it, but the timing is suspicious.
We can't talk about the Oscars without mentioning diversity, can we? There's been a lot of criticism about the lack of representation in the nominations, both in the films and the people who make them.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue, and the Academy's been trying to deal with it for a long time. The numbers are pretty clear. Only a small percentage of nominees and winners throughout history have been people of color. That led to that whole #OscarSoWhite movement back in 2015.
Right. And the Academy's been making changes to try and fix this, haven't they? What have they done to make the awards more inclusive and representative?
They're trying to diversify their membership by inviting more people of color, women, and people from different backgrounds to join. They've also implemented new rules for Best Picture eligibility that focus on representation and inclusion.
It sounds like they're moving in the right direction, but I guess there's still a long way to go.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's going to take time, and these conversations are really important to make the film industry a more inclusive place and reflect the real world.
This has been so interesting so far. We've covered the statuette itself, the history of the ceremony, and some of the controversies. But we're just getting started, right?
There's so much more to talk about. We haven't even gotten to the nomination process or the really specific critiques about some of the categories and awards.
I can't wait to dive in.
So let's talk about how those nominations actually happen, because it's a fascinating process with all these rules and deadlines and, the secret ballots.
Yeah, it sounds more complicated than I thought. Break it down for me. How does a film even get noticed by the Academy in the first place?
First of all, it has to meet some basic requirements. Like, it has to be a feature-length film, which means at least 40 minutes long. And here's the kicker. It needs to play in a theater in Los Angeles County for at least 7 days straight, with at least one showing every day between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m.
So no straight-to-streaming releases unless they do a special theatrical run.
That's right. I mean, there are a few exceptions for categories like Best International Feature Film, Best Documentary Feature, and those short film categories. But for the most part, yeah, those are the rules.
Wow, so it's not just about making a great film, you have to play by the Academy's rules too.
Exactly. Once a film meets those requirements, then it can be submitted for consideration. The producers have to fill out this really detailed form called the official screen credits, listing all the key people involved.
And that's when they say what category they're submitting for.
Yeah, and there's a strict deadline. If you miss it, you're out of luck. Then comes the exciting part, the voting. This is where all those Academy members come in.
The Academy is a huge organization, isn't it? How many voters are there?
As of last year, almost 10,000.
10,000, wow. That's a lot of opinions to consider. And I'm guessing the membership isn't just, actors and directors. It's got to be more than that, right?
Absolutely. They're divided into 18 branches, representing everything that goes into filmmaking. Actors, directors, writers, producers, cinematographers, editors, costume designers, you name it.
So does everyone get to vote on who wins an Oscar?
Kind of. For most awards, members only vote within their own branch. So actors nominate actors, directors nominate directors, and so on.
That makes sense. Keeps things fair, I guess.
Yeah.
The people who really understand a specific craft are the ones making the decisions. But I'm guessing there's an exception for Best Picture. Everyone gets to vote on that one, right?
You got it. Best Picture is the big one, so all members get a vote. And here's the interesting part. It's not a simple majority rules thing. They use a system called preferential voting.
I've heard that term, but I'm not really sure how it works. Can you explain it?
Sure. With preferential voting, members rank their top 5 choices for Best Picture, like in order from their favorite to their least favorite. So it's not just about getting the most votes overall, but who has the most support across the Academy.
So it's more about like overall consensus rather than just popularity.
Exactly. And for some categories, like Best International Feature Film and Best Documentary Feature, the nominations are actually decided by special screening committees. They watch a bunch of films and discuss them to pick the nominees.
It sounds like a pretty organized and thorough process. They're serious about these nominations. But I'm sure a system like this has its quirks, right? I mean, it can't be perfect.
Of course not. You're always going to have debates and arguments when it comes to awards nominations.
Yeah, for sure. Like, sometimes the nominations don't seem to make sense, especially in certain categories.
Whoa, yeah. One of the big things people always argue about is this whole leading versus supporting actor thing. There are so many examples where an actor who seems like a clear co-lead ends up being nominated in the supporting category.
That's always confused me. How do they even decide who's leading and who's supporting?
There aren't really any hard and fast rules, which is where the confusion comes in. The studio actually gets to decide which category to put an actor in.
Wait, seriously. So you could have 2 actors who have equal screen time, but one gets nominated for Best Actor and the other for Best Supporting Actor.
Yep, that's how it works. And critics call it category fraud sometimes.
I get it. It seems like they're trying to game the system, like increase their chances of winning.
Definitely. They want to avoid having their own actors compete against each other, so they pick the category that seems most likely to get them a win.
Do you have any examples of that happening?
Sure. A classic example is Rooney Mara in Carol. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but she had just as much screen time as Cate Blanchett, who was nominated for Best Actress for the same movie.
That's so weird. It just makes you question whether the nominations are really fair and if they actually show the best performances.
It's a debate that comes up every year during Oscar season, for sure.
Okay, so speaking of debates, let's talk about another one. The idea that the Academy is biased towards certain types of performances in movies.
Yeah, people love to throw around the term Oscar bait, particularly for those historical dramas and biopics that seem to check off all the boxes of what the Academy supposedly loves.
Right, like they're rewarding a certain kind of prestige, even if those films aren't the most creative or thought-provoking.
It's a valid criticism, and it goes back to that idea that the Academy is out of touch with what audiences actually want to see.
It's like they're more interested in what they think should be important rather than what people are actually connecting with.
Exactly. And that leads to a disconnect between the films that are considered Oscar-worthy and the ones that are actually popular with audiences.
And then, of course, there's the big question, are the Oscars really a meritocracy? Like, are they always rewarding the best films and performances?
Yeah, the age-old question. Are things like career achievements or making up for past snubs also a factor in who wins?
I've always wondered about those career achievement awards. Sometimes it feels like they're giving it to someone just because they've been nominated a bunch of times before or because people think they're overdue for an Oscar.
It definitely happens, and sometimes it feels like they're trying to correct past mistakes or honor someone's entire career instead of just looking at that specific performance.
Which makes you wonder if those awards are really deserved, or if it's more about sentimentality.
It's a valid point, and it can make the whole process seem a bit less objective.
We also can't forget about all the controversies surrounding certain films or individuals. The Academy has been criticized for ignoring certain films or performances because of politics or social issues.
You're right. The Oscars are very much a product of their time, and they often get caught up in whatever cultural and political debates are happening. It's tough to separate the art from the artist sometimes, or the film from everything going on around it.
And of course, there are the controversies that happen right during the ceremony. Who could forget that Will Smith's slap at the 2022 Oscars?
Yeah, that's one that'll be hard to forget. It definitely got people talking about celebrity, and humor and what's acceptable, especially on such a huge stage.
It was a reminder that the Oscars are more than just glitz and glamour. There are real emotions involved, and things can definitely get unpredictable when it's live TV.
That's live TV for you. Anything can happen.
We've talked about a lot, haven't we? From how the nominations work to all the controversies that have surrounded the Academy. It seems like the Oscars are always changing, trying to find that balance between tradition and progress.
It's like they're walking a tightrope. They want to keep the awards meaningful, but they also know they need to change and be more inclusive. It's not easy.
But despite all the criticism, the Oscars are still a major force in the film industry, right? I mean, they can make or break careers, they shape how people see movies, and they inspire filmmakers to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly. And even with their flaws, they're this global event that people are still fascinated by.
It's a celebration of movies and the power of storytelling.
Right. So we've talked about the highs and lows of the awards and the controversies that have come up. But I'm curious, what stands out to you the most from all of this? What do you think is the most important thing for listeners to take away?
What really strikes me is how the Oscars, even though they're about celebrating art, also tell us a lot about ourselves, about society as a whole. The choices that are made, the films that win, the controversies that happen, they all reflect our values, our biases, and how we understand the world.
That's a really good point. It's like they're holding up a mirror to society and showing us who we are and what we care about.
So we've learned how those golden statues are made, we've dug into the whole nomination process, and we've talked about the critiques that have been made against the Academy. Now it's time for the main event, the ceremony itself.
Yes, the night when all of Hollywood gets together to celebrate the best that film has to offer. It's a night full of anticipation, with speeches that will be remembered forever or maybe forgotten quickly, and moments that will become Oscar legend.
It's amazing how much the ceremony has changed since that first dinner at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel.
It really has. It's become this huge global spectacle, a super carefully planned production that millions of people watch around the world. And it seems like it just keeps getting bigger and more extravagant every year.
I'm really curious about how the ceremony has changed over time, with the introduction of television and the rise of social media.
Yeah.
What do you think those changes have done to the broadcast?
Well, television obviously changed everything. It brought the Oscars into people's living rooms and turned it from this exclusive industry event into something that everyone could experience. And then, in recent years, social media has added a whole new dimension to the Oscars. It's given audiences a way to participate in the ceremony in real time as it's happening.
Yeah, it's like we're all part of the show now. We're sharing our reactions, making predictions, and giving our opinions on everything from the fashion to the speeches.
Mm-hmm. That's it. And the Academy has actually embraced that interactivity by incorporating social media into the broadcast. It's become this multi-platform experience.
On top of all that, they've had to adapt to the changes happening in the film industry itself, right? With all these streaming services popping up, the lines between theatrical releases and what we watch at home are becoming less and less clear. How has that affected the Oscars?
That's definitely a challenge. The Academy has been trying to figure out how to recognize films that are released on streaming platforms because They don't always follow the traditional model of being shown in theaters.
Right, remember all the controversy when Steven Spielberg spoke out against streaming films being eligible for Oscars? It was a big deal. It's a sensitive topic.
It is, and it reflects a bigger conversation about the future of movies in this digital age. What even makes something a film now that streaming is so popular? What's the role of the theatrical experience in a world where everyone's streaming? These are the questions the Academy will have to figure out in the coming years.
It feels like they're at a crossroads. They want to hold on to those Oscar traditions, but they also need to acknowledge how the industry is changing. It's got to be tough to find the right balance.
It really is. Of course, we can't talk about the Oscars without mentioning the fashion.
The Oscars red carpet. It's a phenomenon all on its own. Designers are fighting to get their clothes on the stars, and the fashion critics are analyzing every single detail.
It's like the ultimate fashion show for Hollywood's biggest names.
And the fashion choices often go beyond just looking glamorous. Sometimes they make a statement about culture or social issues.
Totally. We've seen stars use the red carpet to express their political views, promote sustainability, and advocate for diversity. It's a way for them to use their platform to highlight things they believe in.
And then there are those classic Oscar moments that everyone remembers. The speeches that make you laugh or cry, the surprises, the upsets. It's what makes the Oscars so exciting.
Those are the moments that really stick with us. It's not just about who wins, it's about those stories that unfold over the course of the night.
Like when Sally Field gave that speech for Places in the Heart, and she was so excited, she said, "You like me. You really like me."
Or when Roberto Benigni climbed all over the seats when he won Best Director for Life is Beautiful. Those are the moments that transform the Oscars from just an awards show into a celebration of human emotions and the power of art to connect us all.
Those are the moments that make it feel real, you know? Like there are actual people with real feelings behind all the glitz and glamour. So how does the ceremony actually work? Can you tell me about the structure of a typical Oscar night?
Well, it usually kicks off with the hosts doing an opening monologue. It's their chance to set the tone for the evening, make some jokes about the nominees, and get some laughs from the audience.
It seems like a lot of pressure. You have to be funny and charming and able to handle anything unexpected. Not an easy job.
It's definitely not for everyone. And then as the night goes on, we see different presenters come out to announce the nominees and reveal the winners for each category.
And those presenters are usually big stars themselves, right? It's like a who is who of Hollywood up there.
Absolutely. Sometimes they even do little skits or musical numbers to keep things interesting and make sure everyone's paying attention.
It makes sense. You don't want the show to drag on, especially since these ceremonies can be so long. Has the Academy tried to shorten the ceremony at all over the years?
They have. They started putting time limits on those acceptance speeches, which can sometimes get a bit long, and they've even tried cutting certain categories from the live broadcast to keep things moving along. But that hasn't always been popular.
Yeah, I remember that. Some people felt like those categories, like best editing and best sound mixing, weren't getting the recognition they deserved. They're important parts of filmmaking.
It's a tough balance. They want to make sure the show is entertaining and keeps people's attention, but they also want to make sure every category gets its moment in the spotlight.
It's a challenge, for sure. But at the end of the day, the Academy Awards are such an iconic event. It's a night that celebrates the power of movies and storytelling.
Exactly. And even with its flaws, it's still an evening that inspires us, entertains us, and reminds us of how powerful movies can be. Now, you might be surprised to learn that for a long time, the Academy didn't have any specific rules about campaigning for Oscars.
Really? So
Yeah.
It was kind of a free-for-all. What changed?
Well, in the early days, there weren't any formal rules or limits on how studios and people could promote themselves or their films for Oscar consideration. It was much more relaxed. But as the Oscars became more prestigious and the competition got fiercer, campaigning evolved into this complex and often expensive undertaking.
I can imagine. So how did the Academy handle that? Did they start making rules to control the campaigning?
Yes, they did. As time went on, people started worrying about whether studios were having too much influence and spending way too much money on these campaigns. So the Academy began implementing rules in the 1980s to try and level the playing field and make sure the focus stayed on the films themselves, not just the campaigning tactics.
What kind of rules did they put in place?
Well, one of the first rules was that studios couldn't throw lavish parties specifically for Academy voters. They also started limiting the number of screenings and events that studios could hold during awards season. The goal was to stop the crazy spending and prevent voters from feeling pressured or unfairly swayed by all the extravagance.
That makes sense. But I bet studios still found ways to bend the rules, right?
Of course. There are always ways to be creative within the rules. Studios started focusing more on targeted advertising aimed specifically at Academy voters. They'd buy ads in industry magazines, send out fancy mailers, and even create websites just to promote their films for awards consideration.
So it became a more subtle game, less about throwing big parties and more about finding clever ways to persuade people.
Exactly. And social media has become a huge part of Oscar campaigns these days. Studios use platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to create buzz, share behind-the-scenes stuff, and connect directly with voters.
It's amazing how campaigning has changed along with technology. It reminds you that the Oscars aren't just about artistic merit. There's a whole industry and a lot of strategy behind it.
Absolutely. And even with all those regulations, people still wonder if campaigning really affects the voting. Some people think that Academy members are smart enough to see past all the hype and judge the films on their own. Others argue that even subtle forms of campaigning can influence people without them realizing it, shaping how they see the films and the people involved.
It's a complicated issue, that's for sure. But it's definitely something to think about as we watch the Oscars play out. How do we separate what's truly great about a film from all the marketing and buzz? It's a question we can all ask ourselves as we get caught up in all the excitement of award season.
That's such a great point. It encourages us to be more critical and look deeper, The Oscars, with all their history and controversy and glamour, they give us a glimpse into the world of filmmaking. But it's up to us to think about it all carefully and come to our own conclusions.
Well said. Now let's talk about some of the great hosts who have led the Oscars over the years. Who are some of your favorites?
Oh, there have been so many amazing hosts. Bob Hope, he was a legend. He hosted a record 19 times, always bringing his humor and charm to the stage. He was famous for his funny monologues, poking fun at himself, the nominees, and everything about Hollywood.
He was a master of those one-liners, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He must have been able to handle any situation with humor and grace.
He was a true pro. And then there was Johnny Carson, another iconic host. He had that late-night talk show energy and brought it to the Oscars. He was so smooth and sophisticated and always had a quick wit.
He seemed so comfortable up there, like he was having a great time. And speaking of great hosts, how could we forget Billy Crystal?
Yeah.
He hosted 9 times, and people loved him. He had this energy, and he made everyone feel at ease. It seemed like he genuinely enjoyed being up on that stage.
He really did. He was so good at balancing the humor with those heartfelt moments. He could have the audience laughing one minute and then bring them to tears the next. He was a true showman.
Those are some tough acts to follow. Hosting the Oscars is no small feat. You got to be quick on your feet, have a fantastic sense of humor, and be able to handle all that pressure, knowing that millions of people are watching you.
Exactly. And the host has to appeal to such a wide range of viewers, from people who work in the industry to casual movie fans all over the world. It's not easy to find that balance.
And over the years, we've seen so many different styles of hosting, from stand-up comedians to, more unexpected choices.
Yeah, remember when Anne Hathaway and James Franco hosted together? It felt like they were trying to attract a younger audience, but it didn't really work out the way they planned.
It shows that chemistry is so important, especially when you have 2 hosts. They have to be on the same wavelength and play off each other's strengths.
For sure. And lately, the Academy has even tried going without a host altogether. They've been trying to put the focus more on the awards themselves and let the presenters and nominees be the stars of the show.
It's an interesting approach, and it seems to be working for them.
Yeah.
It gives them more time to showcase the nominated films and celebrate the people who made them.
Exactly. It's about finding the right mix, the right blend of entertainment while still respecting the art of filmmaking. And the Oscars are always changing, always trying new things to keep the ceremony exciting.
Speaking of new things, the Academy Awards haven't always had the same categories, have they? They've changed over the years, right?
That's right. The Oscars have changed over time to keep up with what's happening in the film industry and in society in general. They've added new categories and gotten rid of others, which has led to plenty of debate along the way.
I bet there are some interesting stories there. What are some of the biggest changes to the categories that you can think of?
Well, one of the most significant changes was adding Best Animated Feature Film in 2001. Before that, animated films were usually lumped in with short films. But with all the advances in computer animation and the success of movies like Toy Story and Shrek, the Academy realized it was time to give animated features their own category.
It's crazy to think that animated films weren't always in the running for the top prize. It shows how the Academy has to adapt to new trends in filmmaking, right?
Definitely. Another big change was adding Best International Feature Film in 1956, which they originally called Best Foreign Language Film. They created this category to recognize movies made outside the United States and to celebrate the diversity of films from all over the world.
It shows that movies are a global art form, right? The Oscars aren't just about Hollywood anymore. They're about celebrating filmmaking from everywhere.
Exactly. And more recently, there's been a push to create more inclusive categories that reflect the diversity of stories and the people who are telling them. That led to those new diversity and inclusion standards for Best Picture eligibility, which is meant to encourage more representation for groups that have been underrepresented both on screen and behind the scenes.
It seems like a positive change, acknowledging that the stories we see on screen and the people who make them should be just as diverse as the real world.
It is, and all these changes show that the Academy is aware of its role in the film industry. It's not just about rewarding the same kinds of films year after year. It's about embracing change, recognizing new ways of storytelling, and making sure the Oscars stay relevant and reflect the world we live in.
That's a great point. It makes you realize that the Oscars, even with all their history and tradition, are still evolving. They're adapting to new trends and new voices, and hopefully they're moving towards a future where cinema is more inclusive and representative.
You put it perfectly. The Oscars are more than just a glitzy awards show. They're a reflection of our culture, our values, and how we understand the world. And all the changes we've seen with the categories, the hosts, and the ceremony itself show how the Academy is trying to keep up with a world that's changing quickly.
And speaking of changing times, we can't forget about the impact of streaming services on the Oscars. What do you think the rise of platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Apple TV Plus has done to the film industry and the Oscars?
Streaming has definitely shaken things up. It's challenged how we think about what a film is, blurred the lines between movies we see in theaters and those we watch at home, and forced the Academy to reconsider its rules about which films are eligible and how we define cinema in this digital age.
It's created a whole new set of challenges and opportunities, right? On one hand, streaming services have given a platform to diverse voices and stories that might not have been told otherwise.
That's true. They've given filmmakers more freedom and made it possible for people to watch a wider variety of films from around the world.
But at the same time, the rise of streaming has raised concerns about what will happen to movie theaters. Will people stop going to the movies altogether now that they can watch so much from home?
That's a question everyone's asking in the industry. There's no doubt that streaming has affected how many people go to movie theaters.
Yeah.
But I think there will always be something special about seeing a film on the big screen surrounded by other people.
I agree. There's something magical about that shared experience. It's not just about the big screen or the fancy sound system. It's about the energy of the crowd, the excitement in the air, the way everyone reacts together, laughing and gasping at the same time.
You nailed it. It's a social experience, you know? It's a way to connect with people who love movies just as much as you do. And I think the Academy understands how important it is to keep that experience alive. That's why they haven't fully embraced streaming films and still require a theatrical release, even if it's limited.
It really makes you think about what will happen to the Oscars as streaming gets bigger and bigger. Will they eventually make separate categories for streaming films? Will they embrace new forms of storytelling that push the boundaries of what we think of as traditional cinema?
Those are great questions, and I don't think anyone has the answers yet. But we can definitely say that the Oscars are at a turning point. They're facing the challenges of a changing film industry, trying to hold on to their traditions while also being open to innovation and reflecting the diversity of voices and stories that exist in the world today.
It's definitely an exciting time to be a film fan and watch how the Oscars navigate this new landscape. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of those unforgettable moments in Oscar history. What are some of the speeches, the wins, or the upsets that have really stuck with you?
There are so many. One that always comes to mind is when Marlon Brando refused to accept the Best Actor award for The Godfather in 1973. He sent Sacheen Littlefeather, a Native American activist, to decline the award for him to protest how Native Americans were being portrayed in films. It was a huge statement that shocked Hollywood and brought attention to a really important social issue.
That was a powerful moment. It showed that the Oscars could be more than just an award show. They could be a platform for raising awareness about injustice and challenging the status quo.
Absolutely. And then there was Halle Berry's historic win for Best Actress for Monsters Ball in 2002. She was the first African-American woman to win that award, and her speech was incredibly moving. It was a reminder of how important representation and inclusivity are in Hollywood.
Her win was a long time coming, and it felt like things were finally changing, even if it was just a little bit.
It was a huge step forward, but it also showed how much more needed to be done to achieve true equality in the film industry.
What about those shocking upsets? Are there any that really surprised you?
One that stands out is when Crash won Best Picture over Brokeback Mountain back in 2006. A lot of people felt that Brokeback Mountain, with its story about a gay couple, should have won. It caused quite a stir.
That definitely sparked a lot of conversation. It made people question how the Academy was making its decisions and whether there were any biases affecting the results.
Definitely. It showed how the Oscars can reflect what's happening in society, with all the debates and tensions around representation and inclusivity.
These moments, whether they're inspiring, controversial, or just plain entertaining, are all part of what makes the Oscars so captivating. They remind us that the Oscars are more than just a show. They're a cultural event that captures our imagination, shows what we care about, and sparks important conversations about the world around us.
You're absolutely right. The Oscars are like a microcosm of society itself, reflecting our successes, our challenges, and our desire to make things better. They're a story all on their own, with twists and turns and characters we'll never forget.
And the story's still going. We can't wait to see what happens next with the Academy Awards. Now, you're the expert here, so I have to ask. Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about the history, the process, and all the changes the Oscars have gone through. But what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about the awards?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that the Oscars are just a popularity contest. Like, the winners are always the most famous people or the films that made the most money. But while popularity and box office success can definitely play a role, the voting is much more complicated than that.
Right. We talk about how complex the voting system is with all the different branches of the Academy and that preferential voting system for Best Picture. It's not as simple as just having the most fans.
Exactly. Academy members are professionals in the film industry, and they think about a lot of things when they vote. They consider the artistry of the filmmaking, the acting, the technical aspects, and the overall impact of the film. It's not just about popularity. It's about recognizing excellence in every part of making a movie.
And that's why it's important to remember that the Oscars are, at the end of the day, subjective. What one person thinks is a masterpiece, someone else might not enjoy as much. It all comes down to personal taste.
Absolutely. That's why it's so fun to talk about and debate the Oscars. There will always be disagreements and unexpected outcomes, and that's part of the excitement. It reminds us that art is subjective, and there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to judging creative work.
Well said. And I think we also need to remember that the Oscars, while they're a big deal, aren't the only way to measure a film's success. There are tons of other awards, ceremonies, film festivals, and critics who recognize and celebrate great movies.
That's true. The Oscars are just one piece of the puzzle. It's good to consider different viewpoints and think about films critically, forming your own opinions based on what you like and what you believe in.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Oscars, what's the main thing you hope our listeners will take away?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the Oscars, while they're definitely entertaining and glamorous, are much more than just a superficial event. They reflect our culture, our values, and our connection to movies. They give us a unique way to explore the art of filmmaking, the power of stories, and how movies affect our lives.
That's a great point. It encourages us to think about the Oscars in a deeper way, to look past all the glitz and glamour, and really appreciate the art and the hard work that goes into making these films.
You got it. The Oscars can be a way to start deeper conversations about the movies themselves, the stories they tell, and the issues they bring up. They can inspire us to consider different perspectives, to challenge our own beliefs, and to learn more about the world through the lens of cinema.
That's a perfect way to put it, and I think that's a great place to end our discussion today.
Yeah, it's true. A really great film can take you somewhere else, make you think in new ways, and even help you understand your own feelings better. Sometimes, a film can even change the world.
Think about movies like Schindler's List, Moonlight, or Parasite. Those films didn't just win awards, they sparked conversations about things that matter. Social justice, representation, what it means to be human.
Yeah, those films went beyond just entertainment and became part of something bigger, a cultural moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the Oscars so interesting. They're this mix of art, business, and social commentary. They show us who we are, what we believe in, and the stories we want to tell.
This deep dive has been amazing. We've covered the history, the process, the controversies, and how the Oscars continue to have an impact. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but I guess we should wrap things up. Any last thoughts you want to share with everyone listening? I think the most important thing is to remember to question everything, challenge ideas, and really think critically about the Oscars. Don't let the excitement and glamour make you forget what's at the heart of it all, the power of storytelling.
That's a great point. The Oscars are just the beginning, a jumping off point. The real adventure starts when you watch the films, connect with the stories, and let yourself get lost in those worlds.
So go out there, explore the world of movies, and find the ones that speak to you. You never know, maybe someday you'll be walking that red carpet yourself.
That's right. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Oscars. Until next time, stay curious and keep watching movies.